My name is Dana Whitfield, and I was 33 the morning I learned my family had already spent an inheritance that was never theirs to touch. I was standing on Main Street in Cedar Hollow, Ohio, duffel bag on my shoulder, staring at a storefront that hadn't existed the last time I stood there. New paint, a hand-lettered sign, my late grandmother's name stretched across the top of a diner that belonged, on paper, to my younger sister. Grandma June had left me her cabin, 4 acres of hardwood and lake frontage, worth close to $500,000, my name typed cleanly into a will an attorney read aloud at a table I wasn't sitting at because I was overseas. My parents sold it. My sister spent the money. Then my sister texted me, "Thank you for your service." I never answered. What I did after that took almost a year, drained every dollar I had, and ended with my sister collapsing out of a courtroom chair. Welcome to the channel where the quiet ones finally speak, and the family finds out what silence cost them. If this sounds familiar, tell me in the comments, and stay to the end, you'll want to hear how it lands. The drive from Fort Bragg to Cedar Hollow is 9 hours without stopping, and I never stop. I'm a combat medic, an E6, 11 years in. It rewired something in me. I count other people's breathing without meaning to. I had a duffel, boots that had crossed 2 deployments, and a small tin key on a chain, mailed to me at a forward base with a note pressed hard enough to bleed through the paper, for whenever you're tired of being useful. Here's the ledger of my family, up front, because everything after is just people arguing about arithmetic. 11 years, 8 trips home. $350 a month, wired without fail, for my mother's medication, my father's roof, my sister's freezer. I never missed a payment and never asked for anything back. Hold on to that, a woman who never asks isn't generous. She's just found an expensive way to stay far away. I'd been home once in 3 years, 4 days of emergency leave for my grandmother's funeral, then a flight back out. My father can do that math. He isn't wrong. I wasn't driving up for another funeral. I was driving up because I'd finally asked my sister a direct question and gotten an answer I couldn't unsee. I hit Main Street at 6:45. Where the old video store used to be, there was now a full restaurant, reclaimed wood, filament bulbs still burning from the night before, gold letters across the glass, June's Kitchen. Beside the register, lit from below like something sacred, was my grandmother's face. I'd taken that photo myself. Now she watched the street she'd complained about for 50 years, selling somebody's brunch. I stood there 4 minutes with the duffel still on my back. Here's what I couldn't reconcile. My grandmother had been gone 10 months. This place had opened 6 weeks ago, I could still smell the paint. Which meant that while I was running sick call outside Potnan, my sister Reagan, who had bussed tables since she was 15 and never once held more than a few $1,000s, had put over $300,000 into a building. Reagan didn't have that. Nobody in my family did. I already knew where it came from. I'd known since May. Poland, grey sky, a latrine that happened to have the only signal strong enough to load a photo. That's where I stood when Reagan's text came in at 11 at night, a picture first, scaffolding, her arms thrown wide, grinning like a kid on a diving board. She was happy. People leave that part out. She was so happy. Underneath, they were opening soon, she'd named it for Grandma, she wished I could see it. I typed back the only thing I wanted to know, where did the money come from? The dots went on far longer than the answer needed. Then, 5 words, "Thank you for your service." That was the whole message. No blade hidden in it, she meant it warmly, the way you'd thank a sibling far away doing something noble. I set the phone down, laced my boots back up, and covered someone's shift. It took 8 more weeks before I understood exactly what she'd been thanking me for. My parents still live on Larkspur Lane. I went for dinner that first night, because that's what you do. Pot roast, paper napkins folded into triangles. My mother, Carol, has exactly 1 sentence about me, and she said it 3 times that evening. We're so proud of her, aimed at my father, at the gravy boat, at the room, while I sat holding a fork like a stranger at my own table. My father, Walt, barely spoke. He asked if I was sleeping okay, the only question with a real answer underneath, and I lied and said fine. Then I asked about the cabin, and the room dropped 10 degrees. My father looked at me with no anger at all, which was worse, and said, flat and even, "It's handled, Dana. Been handled a year now." Handled. Not sold. Not settled. He chose that word on purpose, the way he chooses every word. You'd expect defensiveness next. He got up, came back with a binder, blue cover, tabbed dividers, organized the way a man organizes 4 decades of county paperwork and slid it across. Look through it. Nothing hidden here. He meant it completely. That's the thing about my father, it took me a year to learn. He's never hidden anything in his life, because hiding is what you do when you believe you've done something wrong. Page 4, sale of the cabin, $48,000, dated the previous March. Page 6 wasn't typed, block capitals, pressed so hard you could read the impression from the back of the sheet. Reimbursement for caregiving, 17 months, $106,000. My father hadn't stolen from his mother's estate. He'd invoiced it. 17 months of lifting her, crushing her pills, listening through the wall for her to choke, and he'd written himself a bill, then filed it where anyone could find it, because in his mind he'd done a job, and a job gets paid. I flipped back to page 5, because there was a line I'd read too fast. 6 years earlier, my grandmother's dock, water flat as glass. She was 82, still driving, still swearing at leeches. She handed me a folder with her new will and told me to read the section marked in pencil pressed hard enough to bleed through 3 pages. The cabin, by name, to me. I argued, give it to Reagan, she's here, I'm never home. My grandmother didn't answer right away. She rebaited her hook, dropped the line, and said the sentence I'd carry through 2 more deployments without understanding. Don't let them pay you in kind words, Dana. I laughed it off. She said, I mean it, and caught a base and forgot about me for 20 minutes. Back at the table, I said, she left it to me, Dad. My name was in it. My father flipped to page 5, consent to sale of specifically devised property, dated February 9th, signature line, same block printing, Walter R. Whitfield, attorney-in-fact for Dana M. Whitfield. Attorney-in-fact for me. Nobody forged anything, I need to be clear about that, because I spent months wishing they had. A forgery is a crime with a name and someone to hate. This was my father using a document I'd signed myself, in front of a notary, before I deployed. I'd handed him the pen. That's the whole story, and I couldn't say it out loud for another 6 months. My mother said the kindest, most devastating thing anyone said to me all year from the sink, without a trace of malice, because she genuinely believed she was helping. You weren't here, honey. Somebody had to sign. And I remembered the room, fluorescent lights, 40 soldiers in a hallway, the smell of a copier running 2 straight days. Every soldier who deploys signs a power of attorney. Without one, nobody back home can pay your rent while you're gone. 6 days before Wheels Up, our window moved earlier by almost a week. I asked for a limited power of attorney, just the apartment, the truck. The paralegal said the general form was faster, everyone was signing it, and I flew Tuesday regardless. I signed the general. That night I called my father, only the apartment and the truck, Dad. He said, understood. He wasn't lying, Walt Whitfield doesn't lie. He meant it completely. 14 months later, he sat at that table and signed my name away on land I had every right to. I found him in the garage the next morning, changing oil the truck didn't need. Somebody had to be here, he said. You sent $350 a month. I changed my mother's diapers for 17 months. Tell me which one cost more. Then, the line that still catches me at 2 in the morning. In this town, whoever stays gets the house. Whoever leaves gets a photo on the mantle. I didn't invent that rule. He came back with a cashier's check for $50,000 and a release, already dated 3 days before I'd even crossed the state line. He'd printed it before I got home. I didn't take it. I asked when he'd printed it. My father, the most honest man I've ever known, looked at the floor and said nothing. My niece Piper ambushed me in a church parking lot 2 days later, shoved a showbox at me. Great-grandma's stuff. Nobody knows I have it. Inside, a button, a dead kitchen timer, a photograph. Piper and I have a thing nobody in my family knows about. During my 9 months in Poland she texted me constantly, about nothing, at 2 in the morning her time because she never once did the math on the time difference. I answered every one, from a cot, from a latrine. She kicked at the gravel and asked the one question nobody else had the nerve to, Are you going to wreck my mom's restaurant? I said, I don't know, Piper. She nodded like an adult. If you do, don't text me anymore. Then she ran. I ate there anyway. Watched my sister work a full shift without ever losing the ticket rail, calling all 19 employees by name, sending a server home early when her kid spiked a fever and covering the section herself. Whatever picture you're forming, spoiled girl handed a restaurant, put it down. Nobody ever handed Reagan a thing. She hugged me hard enough to knock my stool sideways. You see it? I named it for Grandma. The whole town says her name again, every day. My sister had paid our dead grandmother in a noun, and she was so proud she was nearly in tears. I looked past her at a range that cost more than a car and did the math on the one I'd wired money for 3 years earlier. The county register of deeds sits in a basement 40 minutes south. Certified copies cost $4, that's what it costs to learn what your family did to you. There it was, the deed, the consent, dated February 9th. I checked my own duty log for that date. 6-hour time difference, while my father signed my name away in a title company conference room, I was stitching a soldier's burned forearm an ocean away. That's what I was doing while he was doing that. I called a lawyer because I didn't know who else to call. Nora Kessling reads probate in a county where probate usually means arguing over snowmobiles. She read for 9 minutes, then told me the cruelest true thing anyone told me that year. I can't get you the cabin. Not ever. The buyer paid market rate, went through a title company, had no notice of any dispute. The law protects him completely, and it should. Don't hire me if that's what you want. Then, but the money didn't vanish, Sergeant. Money leaves a trail. And your father wrote every bit of it down himself. I drove out anyway. They'd repainted the cedar a soft blue. A swing set stood where my grandmother's raspberries used to grow. I climbed the porch steps and put the tin key in the lock. It slid in. It didn't turn. If you want my whole family summed up in one object, it's a real key to a real promise that opens nothing. The new owner, Owen Kessler, poured me coffee and said, kindly, with no idea what he was doing, your dad told me the whole family had signed off. Had a paper with your name right on it. I made it to the end of his driveway before I came apart for 90 seconds. Then I turned north, back toward town, instead of south toward the base. I'd spent 11 years being the one who leaves. I was about to discover I was terrible at staying. Staying turned out to be a paperwork problem. I burned my leave, then filed for leave without pay, and rented a room above the hardware store for $290 a month, one window, looking straight down onto June's kitchen. Every night I could watch my grandmother's face glowing beneath a street lamp. I had no plan, just a rented room, a hot plate, and the strange sensation of being physically present in a town used to treating me like a roomer. That turned out to be the only asset that mattered. My mother called on day 4, not to ask how I was, but to say people at church were staring. I told her the truest thing I'd said to her in a decade, I don't know how long. Within a week, the whole town had changed how it said hello to me. Nora filed the petition in September, void the consent, since a fiduciary can't use a power of attorney to benefit himself and another child, a full accounting, a constructive trust over whatever remained of the proceeds. The clerk stamped it at 11:20 on a Tuesday. A court stamp makes a small, wet, ugly sound, the sound of a family turning into a case number. My father reacted exactly as I should have predicted and didn't. No calls, no yelling. He simply stopped acknowledging I existed, the way you flip a breaker, the exact move he'd learned from watching me do it to him for 11 years. The showbox sat unopened for 3 weeks before I could face it. The photograph inside, me at 9, missing both front teeth, holding up a base the size of my own wallet. On the back, in pressed pencil, Dana, 1999, she'll be the one who leaves. Make sure she has somewhere to come back to. She'd looked at a gap-toothed 9-year-old and seen my whole future coming. Then she'd spent 2 decades quietly trying to buy me an exit ramp, and my family liquidated it in 10 months to buy a stove. I waited for my mother after church and asked her to say 4 words. Grandma left it to me. She touched my face with total love and said, "Honey, we're so proud of you. But your father was here." Then, turning back at her car door, "Don't make me choose, Dana." She'd already chosen. She just wanted me to say it first so the blame would land on me. Discovery arrived in October, straight from my father, who as personal representative had to produce the full accounting. On February 9th, the day he signed my name, the estate held $68,000 in CDS and still owned my grandmother's original house in town, unsold, appraised at $91,000. No creditor, no emergency, no reason to touch a specifically devised property, which under the law is the very last asset an estate may liquidate. He'd sold it anyway. $48,000 in, roughly $310,000 out to June's Kitchen LLC, memo line, family loan, no note, no schedule. $106,000 to himself, memo line, caregiving reimbursement. Reagan came up the back stairs that night, still in her apron. She didn't beg. Reagan has never begged for anything. You left, she said. I stayed. I was here when Dad couldn't get her off the floor at 4 in the morning. Then, you sent checks and thought that was the same as showing up. Both halves were true, and that's what nobody warns you about. I asked if she knew where the money actually came from. She hesitated 2 full seconds, in a woman who never hesitates. Dad told me you agreed. She'd asked once, gotten the answer she wanted, and bought a range. Not a conspiracy. Worse, that's what most people actually do. My father's attorney spent 2 hours reading my own text messages back to me off numbered exhibits. Just handle it. Whatever you think is best. I don't think I can come tell Grandma I love her. Every word mine, nothing shaded. In 40 minutes he built an accurate portrait of me out of my own sentences, and I watched whatever moral ground I thought I had walk out of the room. My father didn't gloat. He looked almost sorry for me. Somebody had to be here. Piper stopped answering. Then, at 1:14 in the morning, one last message from her own phone before it went dark for good, I thought you were the good one. The next morning, opposing counsel offered $140,000 over 5 years to drop the petition and never discuss it again. Nora didn't dress it up. This is real money. You've got maybe $28,000 to your name. If you go forward and lose, you walk away with nothing and you still lose them. I'm advising you to take it. My own lawyer told me to fold. I sat with it for 6 hours, then wrote a check for everything I had and slid it across her desk. She asked why. Because they've never once had to hear me say no. My re-enlistment window closed. I folded my uniforms one last time and put the duffel under the bed of a rented room in the town I'd run from at 22. The night before the hearing, at 2 in the morning, I heard my grandmother on that dock as clearly as if she were beside me. Don't let them pay you in kind words. I understood something inconvenient about the room I was about to walk into. Every person in it had stayed somewhere for someone, and none of them had ever been paid for it in anything. If I fought the part of my father's story that was true, I'd lose, and deserve to. So I decided to hand them the truth myself before anyone could use it against me. The courtroom was small, yellowed paneling, a radiator that banged like someone trapped inside a wall. My father took the stand and described learning to lift his own mother without hurting her, crushing pills into applesauce, lying awake listening for the sound of choking. He described sitting in his own driveway for 40 minutes, unable to walk inside, and finally walking in anyway. He put a hand over his face and couldn't speak for a while. The room believed him completely. So did I. I know exactly what 17 months like that costs. When they called me, I didn't wait for a question. Your Honor, before we begin, my father is right. I stayed away. I let him carry this alone and sent money instead of showing up, and everything he's told you about me is true, and I want that on the record. A beat. It doesn't make my grandmother's will optional. The radiator banged. Nobody moved. Opposing counsel had spent 4 months building a case out of my own words, and I just handed him the last brick before he could throw it. Nora recalled my father for 3 questions. Did you ask your daughter before signing her name? No. Did you try to call her, text her, email her? A long pause. Yes. Then why didn't you ask her? My father, honest to his core, answered the way he believed with his whole chest was correct, because she wasn't here. Nora said quietly, Your Honor, my client is sitting in the first row. That was the entire case. Not a smoking gun, just a man's honest belief that I was permanently gone, a belief with 11 years of evidence behind it, and the one thing that could break it was a body in a doorway, which I couldn't wire, sign over, or send in my place. Before ruling, the judge looked up over his glasses and said, "Sergeant Whitfield, thank you for your service." The exact phrase my sister had texted me from a scaffold. Free, unlimited, and handed out precisely because it costs the giver nothing. Then he ruled, the consent was void. A fiduciary cannot use a power of attorney to benefit himself and his other child. The sale itself stood, the buyer kept the cabin, forever. But the proceeds were impressed with a constructive trust in my favor, reaching into the assets and equity of June's Kitchen LLC. Reagan went out of her chair. Her legs simply stopped participating. My mother caught her under the arm. Someone gasped. Then the judge added the line that turned a win into a blade: the court would not permit double recovery. I had to elect a remedy, on the record, that day. Nora laid out the 2 doors fast. Door 1. A money judgment against my father, the 106,000 plus equity in the house on Larkspur Lane. That door takes my aging parents out of their own home and leaves my sister's restaurant untouched. Door 2. The constructive trust over June's Kitchen itself, the building, the equipment, the whole business. That door makes me exactly whole and erases the only thing my sister has ever built, putting 19 people out of work, while my parents keep their house. My phone sat open in my lap to my own transfer history: $350, $6,000 for a roof, $2,200 for a stove, 11 years scrolling on forever. 2 invoices, 2 family members, neither of us present in this family for years before either document existed. My mother said, quiet enough that I was the only one who heard, "If you do this, don't come back." My father said, "One last time, somebody had to be here." I answered, "Not sharp, not clever, a surrender, not a comeback. I know, Dad. That's the part one can't argue with." I stood. "Your Honor, the petitioner elects the constructive trust." I took the restaurant. In that same second I got my grandmother's estate made whole with a judge's signature on it, and for the first time in 34 years I asked my family for something instead of sending them something. The taking and the showing up were the same act. And in that same breath I lost my mother, my sister, and my niece, on purpose, wide awake. I walked out a woman I wasn't sure I liked. Here's the joke my grandmother would have appreciated: I won a restaurant, which meant the court sentenced me to stand every single day in the exact town I'd spent 11 years running from. I'd been handed the one thing I'd been avoiding my whole life. The transfer took 6 weeks. Reagan didn't fight it. On the final morning she hung her apron on the hook, set her keys on the cutting board, and walked out without a word. She has never spoken to me again. I kept all 19 employees. I can close a wound in a moving vehicle, not make a hollandaise, and keeping them was the only decision left that didn't require anyone's permission. My father kept the house on Larkspur Lane. I let him keep it by taking it out of my sister instead, and I've never made that arithmetic feel clean. He's never called. I passed him at the hardware store in the spring and he looked through me and left, exactly what I'd done to him for 11 years. He learned it from me. The girl at the register still says thank you for your service every time she rings up my coffee, cheerful every time, and she's never once invited me to dinner. My grandmother is still gone. The cabin door is still blue. Nothing I did fixed anything. The thing I fought didn't lose an inch of ground anywhere else in that county. So at 34, out of the army, with no career and no family, I stood in a kitchen I never wanted. In March it rained 9 straight days. On the 6th, I borrowed a ladder and took my grandmother's name off the front of the building myself, 1 letter at a time, water running down my collar. Not out of spite, because her name was the last thing this family had left to spend. I left the sign blank. People ask what I'll call it. I tell them I haven't decided, which is a lie. I'm just done paying in names. I put the tin key in a drawer under the register. It still doesn't open anything, and it doesn't need to anymore. In April, my niece pushed the door open at 4 in the afternoon and didn't say a word. She wiped down a dirty table, squared the chairs exactly the way her great-grandmother used to, and left without looking at me. She came back the next Thursday. And the Thursday after that. They will never run out of kind words. That's the whole trick of them. They cost nothing to print and there's always another one in stock. So if somebody owes you a piece of your own life, Don't wait around to be thanked for it. Walk into the room, make them look at you, and say the number out loud, because the one thing you can never wire home, never sign over, never have repaid in gratitude, is your own body standing in the doorway. A tin key that opens nothing. A handwritten invoice for 17 months. Gold letters coming down in the rain. If you've ever been paid in pride and told it was a gift, you already know exactly what my sister's text message cost her. Tell me in the comments, would you have taken the trust, or let them keep it? And subscribe, because next week, somebody else finally stops being grateful.